Welcome to part 1 of configuring pfSense. Okay, before we can have our endpoints join the domain, what we need to do is go into pfSense and do a couple of things. First, we want to assign a static IP address to our Windows server that is acting as the Active Directory or the domain controller. So to do that, we will open Microsoft Edge or any browser. And what we want to do is type in http:// and then the IP address of pfSense to that pfSense adapter that is found at 10.0.1.1. Now you're going to get this warning screen first, and that's because pfSense is using a self-signed certificate, which is fine. We can select advanced and then continue. Okay, the default password and username for pfSense is admin, and then pfSense. So go ahead and select sign in, and you see that we're in, and it's asking you if you want to memorize or the browser to remember it. We don't want to, because we're going to set up pfSense, which includes setting up our own password. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to go ahead and use the setup wizard. So I'm going to select next. And this will guide us through some of the steps to configure pfSense. So I will select next. And we can give it a host name, which we're just keeping the host name as it is, which is pfSense. And what we're going to do is go ahead and select the primary DNS server as 8.8.8 and the secondary as 1.1.1. If you're not familiar with those are the free DNS services provided by Google is the 8.8.8.8 and Cloudflare is the 1.1.1.1. Then we can select next, and we want to keep this override DNS, and that allows the DNS servers to be overwritten. Then we'll select next. After we selected next, we're just going to keep the time server selected with the defaults. Select next again. On this page, what we want to do is scroll down and make sure that this is not checked. That blocks private networks from entering by way of the WAN. We want to keep that unchecked. And we can keep block non-internet routed networks from entering. And then we select next. And this is the IP address that we configured manually. So we want to keep that for the LAN. So we can select next. Now it's asking us for a new admin password. So just make sure you keep track of this. You'll still log in as admin, however, it will be a new password. Select next. And now you can reload, and this will save the changes. And then we can select finish. We can accept and close. And this brings us to the dashboard. And what we want to do now is go to interfaces. First one, the LAN interface. And what we want to do with on the LAN interface is to change the name from LAN. Remember the LAN interface going to be the eCore network. So we can scroll down after that. I think there's any other changes. We can select save, then select apply changes. Anytime you make a change in the pfSense dashboard, you will have to apply those changes. A lot of times if you make a change and you don't see the results of it, the first troubleshooting technique is to make sure that you remembered to apply those changes. So go back to interfaces again. This time we'll go to the OPT1 interface. And remember, this is the all safe interface. That's the only change that we need to make at this point, and we'll select save and then apply those changes. And once that is completed, we will rename our final interface, which is the attack LAN. Scroll to the bottom, select save, and then apply the changes. So the next thing we want to do after that is to go to the Services tab and select the DNS Resolver. Once you're at that DNS Resolver, what you want to do is scroll down to the bottom and make sure that we have the DHCP registration selected. And we want the static DHCP selected. And then we can go ahead and move back to the top and go to advanced settings. And under the advanced settings, what we want to do is scroll down to prefetch support, make sure that that is selected, and make sure that the DNS keys are selected. Once you've done that, then what we can do is go ahead and apply those changes. So go down to the bottom and select save, then apply the changes. Let's make sure that the changes we made under general are still what we needed to do is make sure that you select save once you made those. So we need to reselect DHCP registration and the static DHCP, then select save and apply those changes. What I didn't select save under the general settings, then we went to the advanced settings and made those changes. So make sure that you save before you change the tabs. Now we're going to go to System, select Advanced. And the first thing we want to do is go over to Networking. And under Networking, we can scroll down to Hardware Checksum. And we want to make sure that we disable that Hardware Checksum. Then we could go down and select save, and we should be prompted to restart, and we will go ahead and click OK to restart. Now if you hit submit, I believe it will do a 90-second countdown, so I'll pause the video while this restarts. Okay, so now we log back in. Be sure to use that new password that you set up. So it's admin and then whatever password that you set up previously. Now it's going to ask if you want to save the password. You can go ahead and do that now if you'd like to. It's generally not good practice to save a password in the browser because that's one of the first things that is stolen when somebody compromises your system is they will go ahead and steal all your stored passwords from your browser. But now we are back to the main dashboard. The first thing we want to do now is we want to go to status and then the DHCP leases. And what we want to do is assign some static IP addresses. Right now, all of our virtual machines have dynamic IP addresses that were served up with the DHCP server on each of those adapters that we set up. However, when it comes to servers and other services that need to be called back to, we want to establish a static IP address, or else we could lose complete communications with the server or a service that like Splunk or Waza or Elastic, if they don't have a static IP address, because if they get at least another IP address, then obviously then that is broken. So what we're going to do is go to our DC, our domain controller. Right now it has a dynamic IP address of 10.0.1.15. Now remember, the way we set up the eCore network is in that IP range. It starts with 10.0.1. So we see our domain controller, and then we see our two desktops. For the desktops, it's not that critical. In fact, we'll keep those as dynamic, but on the server, we are going to change that to a static IP address. And to do that, just come over on the right-hand side to the plus sign without the background. So basically the white plus sign, select that. And what we can do is assign a static IP address right here. So all we have to do is just make sure that we're in the 10.0.1 IP range. I'm going to give it 10.0.1.2 because remember, we can't give it the .1 because that is the adapter, and we saved the IP range from basically .2 to .10 for just this purpose, to assign static IP addresses. Now, if we assigned it a static IP address inside that DHCP range, then we would have a conflict. So we're just going to go ahead and make it .2. And as we scroll down, we see our DNS server is currently 10.0.1.1. We want to also change that. We can add, and this is the domain controller. So for the domain controller, we're just going to totally change that DNS server to 8.8.8.8, which, as I mentioned before, is the Google DNS service. And then for the second one, we want 1.1.1, and that, of course, is the Cloudflare DNS service. From there, we'll scroll down. I think everything else is going to be good. So we can select Save, and remember to apply the changes. So now the next time that Windows domain controller starts, it's going to have an IP address of 10.0.1.2. All right, so now we're back at the DHCP leases. We see that IP address here, and basically that is going to be a static IP address. We don't have a start or end date yet because we haven't restarted that system yet. So once we restart that system, or we reset the adapter, we'll get that IP address. And I'll go ahead and demonstrate that now. We'll go to our domain controller. We will log in, so we'll get the current IP address, and then we'll reboot. Then we'll see what the IP address is at that point. So we're inside the domain controller. Just bring up the command prompt, and we'll run ipconfig. And you see we have 10.0.1.15. That is the IP address that it got from the DHCP server. So what we want to do is reset the IP address. So we could either restart the computer, or we could type ipconfig/release. And what that's doing is it's releasing any DHCP leases that it currently has. So you see now it doesn't even have an IP address, but we're going to change that. Now we're going to run ipconfig/renew. What it should do now is get an IP address of 10.0.1.2 if everything worked correctly. And there you go. We have it. So that was successful. We just set a static IP address for our Windows server. Now, since we're inside pfSense right now, then we should probably go ahead and set a static IP address for our Kali Linux machine and for our Kali Purple. And the reason we want to do that is with inside the attack network, the Kali Linux machine will be used as a command and control server. So once again, it's a server. So when it's beaconing back, once we compromise a host in the eCore network and we want it to beacon back to the C2 server, we don't want it to lose communications because it got a new DHCP lease. So we'll set up a static IP address for our Kali Linux. And likewise, the Kali Purple machine, which will be in the AllSafe network, is where we're going to set up our SIM. So we don't want to lose that once again if the IP address changes. So we're going to go ahead and set up static IP addresses for both of those machines. So we'll go back to our Windows 11 machine because that's where I'm logged into pfSense right now. And we'll come down to Kali Linux. First, the 2.15. Remember, that is our Kali Purple. Again, we select that plus sign. And we give it the IP address of 10.0.2.2. For these DNS servers, I'm going to keep the adapter as the primary DNS, and then I'll type in 8.8.8 for Google's DNS, and then 1.1.1.1. That way, if pfSense is acting as the DNS server and it fails, we still have coverage for DNS, because if DNS is not working, then we're not going to be able to reach anything on the internet that has a domain name. We could still ping IP addresses, but we could not resolve those IP addresses to domain names. So then we select save and we want to apply the change. Now we want to go back to our DHCP server where all the leases are. And we will go to our Kali Linux. And we're going to change this IP address as well. We're going to 10.0.3.2. And we'll make the changes to DNS also. So we'll go 8.8.8.8 and 1.1.1. That one. Okay, then we come down to save it, apply the change. Change is applied, but just like with the Windows machine currently, and we'll bring one up, they still have their original IP address. So we'll log in. And I know I typed the wrong password. So we'll go back. This is actually the Kali Purple machine. Log in. And if I run IPA or ipconfig, we see we get the 10.0.2.15. I'm going to clear the screen here so we can see better. So now I'm going to run ifconfig. ETH0, that was the name of the adapter, and I'm going to type in down. And what this is doing, you have to run this as sudo, so that's a good learning point. Anytime you're making changes, you need to run it as administrator, so we use the term sudo. So now sudo ifconfig ETH0 down. So now if we did type in IPA, you see we don't have an IP address on our ETH0 adapter. So now we want to do is bring it up. So it's the exact same command as before, sudo ifconfig, then the name of the adapter, but this time instead of down, we're going to type up, and this is just starting that adapter back up. So now if we go to see the IP address, we see it's the 10.0.2.2. So that static IP address works. So now we just need to confirm that it's working on our regular Kali Linux. And I think I killed that terminal when I typed in the wrong password. So I'm going to pop back over to Proxmox. I did kill it, so I want to restart it. And as soon as I see that arrow, of course, I will do the drop down on the console and select Spice, and then click the download. So now Kali Linux is starting back up. And I'll log in with the correct password this time. So now that we restarted it, we don't even need to take the adapter down and bring it back up. We can just come in and type IPA, and you get the IP address 10.0.3.2. So that demonstrates that those static IP addresses are up and working. One of the things you saw is I used the command ifconfig when I took that adapter down and brought it back up. It's ipconfig for Windows, and it's ifconfig for Linux, and it stands for interface. So you could get your IP address from typing ifconfig, just like you do with IPA. However, with other Linux systems, ifconfig does not come pre-installed, so you have to install it. It used to be that was the only way you get the IP address, so that was the primary way to get the IP address. A few years ago, they changed it to where the default is just typing IPA. So that completes this lesson. And in the next video, we are going to finish configuring pfSense by creating some firewall rules.